Okay, calm down.
And you, in fact, tweeted out part of a bill introduced by two Republican members of Congress, Guy Rechtsheimer of Pennsylvania and Max Miller of Ohio. We'll throw up a screenshot of that bill. But can you talk about this bill and what it would do?
I was just sifting through the latest bills that have been introduced in Congress because I'm a very strange person. I don't recommend that people emulate my way of life,
But
but
it's good
this
for
is
us.
what I do. Yeah. And I saw that those two Republican congressmen had introduced this bill to basically equalize the disbursement of benefits that U.S. military service members are entitled to under certain employment law. Where, for example, if you enlist in the U.S. military and you go overseas, you can get your loan repayments frozen, or you can get certain guarantees about re-employment once you return. You can get certain protections under employment law and housing, etc. A whole slew of benefits. And these two members of Congress want to afford Americans who go and serve in the IDF those same benefits as though they had just served in the U.S. military.
So crazy.
And Max Miller, who's one of the sponsors, he was essentially handpicked and placed into office by Trump, because Max Miller, he's only 35, so a lot of Republicans and conservatives online, like, they'll try to say, oh, the pro-Israel zealotry, that's just something that's unique to like the conservative boomers, right? The Fox News obsessives. No, I mean, a lot of the most hardcore people are actually like 40 and under, Elise Stefanik, Max Miller, and others. But Max Miller was he was endorsed by Trump very early in the 2022 cycle, because Max Miller had worked on the Trump campaign as like an advance man, and then had worked in the White House doing like advance work for Trump. So he had like a personal relationship with Trump. He got married in Trump's Bedminster estate, the same estate in New Jersey where Trump had hosted that function for the extreme Messianic Jewish group.
Right.
And Max Miller's wife, he got married to with Trump basically presiding over the ceremony, is the daughter of the guy who then won the Republican Senate primary nomination in Ohio with also Trump's endorsement. So it's like a whole incestuous thing. And Trump put him in there. And Max Miller runs around. He got elected on a pledge that he was going to help Trump advance the, quote, America First agenda. That's the ground on which also Trump explicitly endorsed him. So apparently, advancing the America First agenda includes carving out benefit structures for Americans who go and serve in a foreign military, which is the Israeli military. Now, in fairness to Max Miller, I don't think he even views Israel as a foreign country. I mean, I think a misconception here is that these people think that like there's like a cognitive dissonance where Israel's a foreign country, but they kind of believe that you can be America first and also pro-Israel. They don't think of Israel as a foreign country. They think of it as an extension of American power, which is not entirely wrong, and an extension of American hegemony, which exists at the pleasure of American power, which is, again, I think, a plausible theory, but that kind of gives you some insight to how they can reconcile this. But yeah, Max Miller, he's one of the most hardcore pro-Israel people in the whole Republican conference in the House, which is really saying something. And he's the one running around with the America First mantle, and he always boasts about his endorsement by Trump and whatnot. So this is not me making a pro-Biden argument by any stretch. I'm not voting for any of them, right, including RFK Jr. But I do think it is worth analyzing the differences in the coalitional makeup between the Republican nominee and the Democratic nominee in terms of like what's guiding their decision making, in terms of how they manifest their pro-Israel ardor, because it's just a slightly different for the Republicans and Trump, where they really are backed by some of the most extreme fanatical elements. I mean, I guarantee, if you and I were going to go to Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv, Jerusalem is a whole different story. I don't know if you've been to Israel.
Yeah.
You should go. Okay. Yeah.
I
I mean, Jerusalem is like a religious. It's like ground zero for every crazed religious person on earth, right? Of any sectarian disposition. And I guarantee every crazy person that I encounter, like the most hardline crazy person who was Jewish in Israel, they were invariably the biggest fans of Trump. Like, Trump is supported by the most crazed religious elements. Now, Biden has strong support, but they're more secular Jewish elements of support, right? So it's just a difference, and it gives the Republican position on Israel this more apocalyptic end times tinge when you combine it with the Christian Zionist component, which is also very powerful in the Republican coalition, which is kind of worrisome. Not that the Democratic version of this is particularly uh, hopeful or anything. It's just different in nature. Stefanik is basically campaigning for vice president by going to the Knesset in Israel and denouncing Biden and saying how much better and more extreme Trump will be in his fealty to Israel, which he's probably correct about.
Should we play Stefanik
Yeah, dude.
talking in Israel?
As long as I serve the American people, I will defend George Washington's vision of religious pluralism and freedom. Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home.
I love the idea. Well,
and supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil.
I love the idea that religious pluralism requires supporting Israel without conditions.
And I didn't.
The Jewish state.
I should have maybe included this part in my little montage that I spliced up, but she started off the George Washington segue by claiming that American support for Israel literally stems to the era of George Washington because of like some this like folklore about how George Washington received a letter from the rabbi of Newport, Rhode Island, or something. But she was trying to connect that to the U.S. support for the state of Israel circa 1948, which is amazing. I'm sorry, I really find it difficult to bear Elise Stefanik more than most politicians. She's so brazen and cynical in her pandering. Like she's somebody who you should go read this New York Times profile of hers that was done of her.
I did.
Oh, you did?
This
Oh,
week,
yeah.
like this weekend or last week?
No, this is from
recent one?
January of 2023.
Oh, okay.
Where it goes into her history at Harvard, where like she was basically this like moderate Republican who was going to bring lots of women into the party. She's going around recruiting women. She had like she was moderate on social issues, so like she was in favor of like federal protections for gay marriages and whatever. And then all of a sudden, like a flip switch during Trump's impeachment, when she realized she got a huge amount of attention and fundraising money by just being the most ostentatious, kind of just brash defender of Trump. And then now she's actually going around self-identifying as ultra MAGA.
Right.
When she's somebody, and that tells you how flexible this whole notion of MAGA or America First is, because she's somebody who started out her career at the at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which is the most like ardent pro-Israel think tank in DC, and she's just like the most unapologetic interventionist on almost anything. But she gets christened by Trump as like this paragon of America First. So it just tells you it doesn't mean anything. All it means is basically fidelity to Trump. I mean, the Republican Party actually is kind of a personality cult. I know that sounds like a Rachel Maddow line, but the fact is that right now Trump commands more personal sway over the Republican Party than probably any figure in like a modern American history over one political party. Trump puts out one Truth Social post and he determines who wins Republican primary elections in the House and Senate. It's actually incredible. And there's no kind of guiding theme as to who he endorses other than personal loyalty to Trump. So it's a personality cult. Otherwise you can't discern any other intelligible ideological continuity in terms of his endorsements beyond just personal obsequiousness to him. So it's actually kind of I'm finding it more and more disturbing as somebody who kind of like fended off or was wary of some of the more excessive anti-Trump hysterics like over the years. Now it's like reached a different phase that I find more alarming than I would have like 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe I'm alone and maybe I'm crazy. I don't know, but there's something that is just off about it.
I know what you mean though, that thing where you don't want to agree with with people you disrespect, but like what is it? A broken clock is right 2 times a day. I mean,
But you notice that she, at least Stefanik in that clip, makes a point to say that the aid has to be without conditions.
Yeah, right.
There's no other. I don't think there's a single other government expenditure, domestic or foreign, that Elise Stefanik would say ought to have zero conditions attached to it. Like imagine her saying that with respect to any kind of domestic spending item. No way. Republicans love to claim that they're safeguarding American tax dollars and whatnot. But here, it's like the biggest like the organizing virtue of the Republican Party is to have zero conditions at all in just subsidizing the warfare of a technically foreign state. Now, they don't think it's a foreign state, and I can see that the argument for that. But at least in terms of the international system, it technically is a different state.
I want to return to the point you made about how Israel is, seen as not a foreign state, and in some ways that makes sense because it really is an arm of the U.S. and U.S. hegemony. What does that mean concretely?
One thing that Stefanik mentions in her speech there, and you see a lot of pro-Israel politicians reference this in reverence, is that within 12 minutes, Harry Truman recognized the Declaration of Independence of Israel in 1948. And it was only through the accession or through the countenance of the U.S. that Israel became a state. Frankly, now
Right,
it's
of course.
complicated. I'm not saying it's that strictly simple. The Soviet Union was involved, etc. France, but particularly by the 1960s, once Israel began to more militarize, right, and then definitely by 1967 when it conquers the Palestine, the West Bank, and adjoining territories. The U.S. becomes basically inextricable to the very sustenance of the Israeli state. So not when it was just like kibbutzim or like left wing, like Noam Chomsky
Right.
going to live on a kibbutz, right? No, that when it became a modern nation state with all the furnishments, then that was an outgrowth or an extension of U.S. power. I mean, John F. Kennedy ahead of the 1962 midterm elections, put out a notice to American Jewish groups saying that vote Democrat in the 1962 midterm elections because I'm getting ready to approve the first mass disbursement of arms to Israel in like a heavily militarized sense. The first 10 or 15 years or so of the existence of Israel, the U.S. was kind of a little bit more detached from it, or had like a bit more a mixed approach. But the point is, at least like if you even want to just demarcate it from 1967, which I think is a good place to demarcate it because that's when it became a bona fide occupying power, right?
Right.
It only does so at the pleasure of the U.S., right? And in terms of
Yeah.
I don't have to recite all this to you, but in terms of its place in the international system and the UN and diplomatically, economically, militarily, and every other sense, Israel exists as a function of U.S. power. Now, you can make an argument that it actually diminishes U.S. power in the long run by exposing it to so much Arab and Muslim animus in the middle of the Middle East and this like hotbed of religious extremism. And that might be correct, but the fact remains that it is a function of U.S. power. And that's why when you go to Israel, just flash your U.S. passport around, and it's like you might as well be an Israeli citizen, even if you're not Jewish, like myself.
Right.
Although they all assume I'm Jewish, which was a benefit for me because of my, I guess, self-deprecating manner,
Right.
and good looks. But yeah, it's just I just think it's inextricable. That's why when people we'll have sometimes people say that, oh, we should just let them fend for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Or we should pull out from the Middle East, or we should not get entangled in these foreign conflicts. Well,
Right.
you might want that in a vacuum or in principle, but it's just inescapable that there is this inextricable tie between the U.S. and Israel. That's why, when people talk about the Israel lobby or the Jewish
Yeah, exactly.
lobby,
That's the big debate, right? Whether it's like the dog wagging the tail or the tail
mutual.
wagging the
I
dog.
think at this point it's mutual.
Yeah.
I don't think there's not either or. But even when people talk about the pro-Israel lobby, there's a lot of focus on AIPAC, and AIPAC obviously is influential because it's the more overtly political element of the pro-Israel lobby. But there's such a huge constellation of groups and individuals that comprise the pro-Israel lobby and have for decades.
And Kufi also on the Christian side.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Christians United for Israel, and this is why I'm talking. I made a point to distinguish the Republican pro-Israel coalition from the Democratic one because Kufi, Christians United for Israel, that was only founded in 2006 or 7, right. So it hasn't been around for all that long, right? So, in the 90s, you wouldn't have seen Focus on the Family and Parents Research Association and these other Christian right groups that much involved in Israel, right?
Yeah.
But then it became a real organizing force. And actually, John Hagee came to Washington, D.C. and lobbied Mike Johnson, who's also an evangelical Christian, to really get to work on passing that national security supplemental bill for almost 100 billion with the Ukraine funding and then also the Israel funding, and it worked. Yeah, but so I don't know. People I sometimes encounter people who just assume that the influence of the Christian evangelicals has diminished because, like, I guess maybe society overall has secularized, but I don't think that's true at all for the Republican Party. I think it's actually grown in prominence. I mean, can you imagine a Republican now doing anything like what George W. Bush even did by endorsing a two-state solution? No way.
Right. Yeah.
And in
Or
fact,
when Reagan called up and said to Reagan, this
right.
is a Holocaust, apparently. I mean, that wasn't public, but he got him to stop doing what he was doing in Lebanon.
Yeah, no, you're right. And Trump in particular, because he's not himself a professing Christian. I mean,
Right.
sometimes he'll claim to be a Christian.
Yeah,
and
I remember they asked him why the IRS was targeting him. He's like, because of my extreme religiousness or something.
Yeah, or Lauren
hilarious.
Boebert said that, like, when he fell asleep in court this week, he was actually praying.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Or last week, I think. But because he's not like really a believing Christian, but just panders to them so ostentatiously, or at least he hasn't in this election cycle because he already has them in the bag, so he doesn't have to cater to them anymore.
Yeah.
So that means he has to even be more kind of just blatant in catering to their wishes. Whereas George W. Bush, for example, who was, he claimed to be a born again Christian, he was an alcoholic when he found God, etc.
Right.
So he had like more of a personal attachment. Therefore, he didn't have to quite as brazenly pander to them. So it's like a counterintuitive dynamic, right?